Alright, so we haven't actually handled any ground-level apologetics in a long time, and while technically this is considered low-hanging fruit, as somebody who lives in the southern United States, this isn't exactly stuff that I haven't heard in real life from real people around me in the real world. Sometimes those really bad ground-level apologetics are exactly what keep people entangled in bad thought processes. So, let's roll the intro and figure out why, if we all came from the same monkeys, why don't we speak the same language? Alrighty everybody, so if you're new here, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you decide that you like the content you're gonna see. But, like, after you see the content, because otherwise that's just a blank sub and you don't know what you're getting into. Also, I'm gonna have an announcement video here in a few days to let people know what's been going on with the channel, so definitely keep an eye out for that. And that said, let's get into the fan art and then into the video proper. So first off, we have Suris on a sheep by Disco Scone, then we have a furry Suris by Owl Shapeshifter, and then Suris on an Etch-a-Sketch by Derek. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions, and let's get right into the video, where today we'll figure out why we speak different languages, apparently.
Hello, Sierra Vista Christians again. We'll talk about the origins of where did racism, if racism is so bad, where did it come from, and how come no one seems to fess up to it?
So, why racism is so bad and why nobody fesses up to racism? Or is it why nobody fesses up to being the proprietor of all racism, the originator? I'm not certain what question you're actually asking here, and the name of your video has to do with language, not racism, though the two are definitely linked together. So, continue, I guess. Maybe we'll get some more clarity.
Well, because maybe the whole concept itself needs to be studied. Using our Bible as a reference, the question is, okay, I got you. If we all come from the same place, how come we all speak different languages?
Because whether or not human beings came from the same place thousands of years ago doesn't change the fact that language would evolve separately from genetic evolution. Like, it's a pretty well understood sociological concept that the evolution of language is its own thing. Being human and having the genetics that we do means that we specifically have the ability to speak and perceive language as we currently understand it. Like, again, the fact that we're all human just means we have the ability, the potential for language. It doesn't mean that we have to all speak the same language, it just means that we can speak a language. Just like having opposable thumbs doesn't mean that we have to use those opposable thumbs in the same way. For one person, an opposable thumb means that they're able to steadily handle tools and build, but for another person, opposable thumbs may mean that they're able to craft a quilt. And then for somebody like me, it means I can keep hitting the space bar when playing League of Legends to center the camera on myself because I can't play with locked camera. Having the ability to use a tool doesn't mean that everybody in the race is going to use the tool the same way.
I think that's a good question. If we all started from Adam and Eve begat Noah and his sons, and they are the only ones to survive the ark. I don't think they spoke different languages on the ark. How did this different language thing happen?
So, I'm sure you're going to get into your own explanation as to why, but let me go ahead and poison the well and preemptively point out that we are able to actually trace the evolution of language throughout history. We're able to see how certain languages come from Latin and Germanic roots, and then evolve into something completely different as time goes on. If you want a very basic level of this, let's go ahead and take the difference between British English and American English. Certain words are spelled completely differently between the two dialects. Certain words mean something completely different here than they do in Great Britain. If I say a biscuit, I'm talking about a piece of bread. It may be buttery, it may be flaky, but it's going to end up having a crust, and I'm probably going to pile eggs, cheese, and bacon on it to make a sandwich. But if I go to Britain and I use the word biscuit, I could just as easily be talking about what I would refer to as a cookie, and if I want to get an actual biscuit there, at least as far as I understand the word, I'll probably have to ask for a scone. Even certain base-level things that we take for granted, like our mannerisms, vary culture to culture. And as these are all methods of communication, they are in and of themselves a type of language. For instance, in my country, if I sit cross-legged and point my foot towards somebody, it doesn't mean anything. But there are some countries where if I do that, I'm insulting them by saying that they are no better than the dirt on my feet. That is another difference in language with something as subtle as how I'm operating my body. And again, it's incredibly easy for us to actually trace these things back to their roots.
Well, we have to go check our Bible again, and yeah, that's pretty much my primary reference source. Once the minions of Noah unleashed to repopulate the earth, they did exactly what God told them not to do and stay in one spot. And instead of being fruitful and multiplied, they stayed in one spot and tried to. This guy is a representation of a guy named Nimrod, dutifully named.
You do realize that Nimrod was actually considered to be an incredibly intelligent person in his day, right? The nomenclature of Nimrod meaning stupid, at least in the English dialect, isn't something that really has a whole lot of merit. But anyway, I think the more important thing here is noting that, one, if we're talking about Noah, they were fruitful and multiplied. They just didn't spread as far as God wanted them to do, but they literally did multiply. Moreover, and more importantly, you are aware that the genetic bottleneck that would have come from Noah means that we functionally wouldn't have a human race in a handful of generations, right? I'm not meaning to actually insult the Bible when I call it a book of fairy tales in this particular instance. It is a historical document, but it does contain myths and legend in it. The problem is that when you try to take those myths and legends that cultures use to define themselves, and then try to argue that those are actual historical happenings, even when they're fantastical and certainly not comporting with reality, you start running to an issue where things that make absolutely no sense when you look at them under a microscope start to have to be justified. Like 2 people populating the Earth with Adam and Eve, or 8 people populating the Earth after Noah. Not counting the amount of inbreeding that would have happened between the animals themselves, since there was only 2 of each. But based on how you're wording this so far, it sounds like you're trying to treat this as a book filled with nothing but accurate history. So, let's dive in.
Build a tower to reach the sevens, reach the heavens, and pretty much rule the earth in only one spot.
Rule the earth in one spot? No. God was concerned that humans were blaspheming by building the tower to avoid a second flood. They weren't trying to reach the heavens to become supreme rulers of the world. It was literally a story of God being upset that humans could accomplish things when united. Now, in reality, we would be able to tell, based on how we know language works, that people would not suddenly lose the ability to communicate on a tower like this. Not on a mass scale, anyways. The story of the Tower of Babel has 2 purposes. 1, to show that God can and will subvert the human race if they try to blaspheme against him, and 2, it tries to work as a method of explaining why there are diverse languages in the human race. And you can find similar stories in other religions and even mythoses behind different countries. Culture works really hard to try to explain itself. Trying to explain the reasons why you exist in the way that you do is part of being human. Again, my issue is when you take those myths that obviously are there to try to be a stand-in with explanatory power, and argue that they are in fact historical reality, and not just an elaborate metaphor or an extrapolation on a real event. Like the difference between saying Alexander the Great existed, and Alexander the Great existed and also had several divine accomplishments.
And this was what God told him not to do this, so he said he came down and he took man and spread him throughout the world and confused his languages. If you thought Adam and Eve was, I thought Adam and Eve was a much easier, required a lot less faith to believe that. That one is pretty hard to come up with. But once again, study it, do your own studying. There's a city, there is an area on earth called Babel.
And again, that's not the thing in contention. The existence of a place called Babel does not make the story of the Tower of Babel true. Like I pointed out with Alexander the Great, simply having a man who existed, who we know as Alexander the Great, does not suddenly mean that all of his accomplishments that were documented are true. Or let's take another local easy example. A place exists called the United States. We have a myth that we teach to children about the discovery of the United States by Christopher Columbus, the Pilgrims escaping here and then befriending the Indians and then settling. That is a series of events that did in fact happen, but it is severely whitewashed to the point to be myth, while everything that I mentioned did technically happen in some aspect, it ignores other very important things, like the fact that the Americas were actually discovered by Amerigo Vespucci, and that the settling on Plymouth was a little more chaotic and less friendly than simply asking the local natives to pack up their shit and leave. I could tell the realistic version of the story, and then I could tell the whitewashed mythological version of the story, and based on your logic, you wouldn't be able to determine which one is true, because they both happened in the same places with the same people and the same moving parts. A story simply containing elements that are factual does not make the story factual.
Did Nimrod exist? Well, the Akkadian dynasty existed about the time that Nimrod was supposed to be there, and the Akkadians were known for building crazy stuff like that. That's going to be for you at a different time,
right
a different
here,
place.
right now, where I've already explained the problem with this type of
Right
logic.
now, you want me to get to the science, something which you can attack to show that maybe I am completely full of it. So let's go check out the science. Oh, a map? That's the best you got? It worked for me. What we can see here is a map right here. I've got Russia, Georgia, Turkey, Armenia. Now my biggest one is there's Georgia, there's Russia. They can't talk at all.
Yeah, and the United States is located right next to Mexico and Canada, yet I can speak neither Spanish nor French. Around those borders, more people will be bilingual as just a matter of circumstance. But it does not mean that proximity suddenly says that we're able to speak the same language. There are sub-communities here in the United States where I could not be understood if I walked in and started speaking English.
Georgia's been there since the beginning of time. Russia's been there since the beginning of time. Their languages are absolutely, completely, 100% incompatible.
Uh-huh. And again, that proximity doesn't do anything, nor does it have any explanatory power. Also, this one may be a nitpick, but trying to argue that Russia and Georgia have been there since the beginning of time kinda flies in the face of the biblical narrative, doesn't it? Like, sure, the rocks and everything that make up the landmass might be there, but Georgia and Russia, as, like, actual nation-states? I'm fairly certain that they weren't there at the time of Adam and Eve. And if they were, then there's some parts about the creation story that certainly aren't adding up anymore. I'm not meaning to be personally insulting when I say this, but I'm starting to understand why a simple map like this was enough to convince you. In the same way that putting a level on the ground is enough to convince a flat earther.
It's not like Spanish and Portuguese, not like French and Italian. This is like English and Vietnamese. I mean, maybe a couple words in that's it. So, I got it. It's not perfect, but the idea is that Georgians speak a language that no one knows where it came from.
Actually, the Georgian literary language is based off of East Georgian dialect, which is part of their literature, which is based off of 12th century documents. There's also another dialect called Old Georgian, which was used for religious purposes. They're actually part of what's called the South Caucasian language family. And if you take the Old Georgian script, it actually is derivative of the Greek alphabet. This is because the order of the alphabet is actually in the same sequence as the original Greek. The shape of many of the characters is also very derivative of the Greek alphabet. And Old Georgian is what we get the derivatives of later Georgian languages from. So, when you try to tell me that we don't know where that language came from, we do. We literally do. Greek. Russian, on the other hand, has different languages as its derivative of Old Church Slavonic. We know why they speak different languages. The origin source of their languages are different. The map isn't convincing. It's not just a not perfect example, it's not an adequate example. At a base minimum, showing two countries that are close in proximity but have different languages doesn't actually explain anything. You don't get from these two countries are close in proximity and can't communicate with one another to a bunch of people were building a tower and one day magic made them confused. You're actually currently competing for a gold medal in mental gymnastics.
Thus, kind of giving me more credence that maybe someone came in and mixed all the languages up.
It doesn't even lend an ounce of credence to that idea, though. The amount of logical hoops you have to jump through to get to that conclusion are astounding.
For our own good. Well, thank you very much for listening. Once we get back, we'll go back, once we come back in the next video, how does Abraham play into all this?
Spoiler alert, he really doesn't, but for fun, his method of communication also involved cutting up a bunch of birds. But anyways, that's the end of the video. I know it's a shorter one, but I'm gonna be getting a few shorter videos out because taking on massive projects has really started to burn me out, and I still want to be able to get content out for you guys. That said, if you want me to tackle any more of this guy's channel, it's a small one, but his channel's name is William Kalal, then please let me know in the comment section below. He's actually got a decent few videos. I haven't really seen any responses to this guy, and hell, I only found out about him because I was sent his videos directly. So if you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button, share it with your friends. You can also do me a massive favor and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you enjoy content like this, then my Patreon is always an option. There's affiliate links in the description, and I think that's basically everything, right? Yeah, probably. Anywho, as always everyone, insert end of video tagline here.